guys, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my Flagstaff home. In today's video, I'm going to do a Q&A. Over the last couple of years since I did my pine needle basket tutorial, I've had a lot of questions from different people. And so I thought I would just put a video together that kind of addressed all of these questions in case any of you have kind of had some of these running through your mind and wanted to know. So yeah, let's go over these. So let me, let's see. Oh, okay. So I'm trying to group the questions together. Somebody was asking me if a basket can be made over multiple sittings. And the answer to that is absolutely, hands down, yes. I almost never finish a basket in one sitting unless I'm making just a teeny tiny little thing. And so here's the thing. If you're going to make a basket over time, if you're using pine needles that have been treated with vegetable glycerin, and if you don't know what that is, I have a video. So go to youtube.com/myflagstaffhome and look for my video about treating pine needles with glycerin. If you're using that, it doesn't matter. You can just pick them up anytime you want. If you're not treating your pine needles with glycerin, the problem is the pine needles dry out and the basket dries out if you're making it over time. And so what you have to do is you have to keep your pine needles damp. So once you've soaked them, and make sure you go through the instructional video, but once you've soaked them, you're going to want to keep them in a bag with a damp paper towel just for a few days. You don't want to store it with a damp paper towel forever, or it'll cause some mold. We'll talk more about that in this video. But anyway, that will keep the pine needles damp. But then the basket is going to dry out too. And when you're sticking the needle in around the edge of the basket, it can break the needles if they're dry. So the best thing to do with that is put the basket that you're in the middle of making, put it in a plastic bag, like a Ziploc bag with a damp paper towel, just to keep the pine needles moist. If you happen to set it down for quite a while and the whole thing dries out, then you can take the basket and sit it in some water and just let it sit in preferably warm water for an hour, just to moisten up the needles. And it doesn't matter if you do, pine needles live outside typically, right? Until we bring them inside and try to make something out of them. And so it's not going to damage them to sit in water. But yes, you definitely can do that. And your needles either need to be damp or they need to be treated with glycerin so they stay flexible. Okay, someone had asked me how to change the shape of a basket. The shape of a basket has everything to do with the shape of the center coil that you make. So now some people make baskets that are triangular or square, and with those they use these wire things. I have never done that before, so I don't know how to do that at all. I do a coil basket. So if you want a round basket, you make your coil as round as possible at the beginning, and then your basket will just follow that shape the whole time. If you want it to be more like soap dish shaped, or you want to make it even more like maybe you were going to put a little cloth inside of it and put a baguette or something like that, it all depends on that coil in the center. And so if you want it to be longer, then instead of making a round coil in the center, you make it like this. You make it oval. And however you make that, however you shape that, is what your basket is going to end up being shaped like. So, okay, a lot of people have asked me if they can use green needles. And they've asked me, like, if they found a branch on the ground. I don't cut a branch off a tree. And I wouldn't even rip pine needles off of a tree. But if you find a branch on the ground that has green pine needles on it, people have asked, can I make a basket out of those needles? I wish I could say yes, because if we could make baskets with those beautiful, that brilliant green color of the fresh pine needle, boy, that would be pretty. The answer though is yes and no. If you make your basket out of fresh needles, fresh green needles, they're going to shrink. When they dry, they're going to shrink. And so then you've got this nice tight basket that you've worked on. And when the needles shrink, all your stitches are going to get loose. So not a good idea. But you can use green needles. You take your green fresh needles and you dry them out of sunlight, because sunlight makes the green needles turn tan. It will happen. And so you want to make sure that you're drying them in a dark place. And then they kind of fade to sort of a grayish green color. And then you can make a green basket. Or many times I've made a basket that's tan and then has like a green stripe. Problem is that anytime the sun hits that green, it's going to turn it to tan. So your finished basket either needs to be kept out of sunlight all the time. Like I wouldn't even have it in indirect sunlight. You need to make sure that it's just not in a room that's going to put light on it. Or the other thing, which is what I've started to do, is the other thing you can do is get a matte UV spray from the craft store. Don't get the shiny kind. It looks weird on a basket. Believe me, I've tried. But you just get this matte spray, and you can spray the whole basket, but I just spray the green part. So if your whole basket is green, obviously you're going to spray the whole thing. But if you just do a stripe, just spray the front of it and spray the back of it and let it dry out. It's going to smell really chemical, fumey at first, but when it dries out, it will lose that chemical smell and you'll smell the pine needles again in it. The one drawback I would say is that the UV spray is going to make your basket stiff, or at least the part of your basket that you sprayed. It's going to make it stiff. So, but yeah, that's how you can use green needles. So, let's see. Okay. I've had a lot of people ask about thread. I use a wax polyester thread when I make my baskets because they come in different colors. It's also the wax causes the thread to grip on itself, and so it helps to make a really tight stitch. But I've had so many people ask me, can I use sewing thread, Glover's thread, upholstery thread? Can I use yarn? Can I use embroidery thread? Yeah, I've had a million questions about thread. So here's the thing. The thread you use needs to be sturdy. So sewing thread, I would not think that would be good because you need to give it a really good tug, and it's going through the needles over and over again. You're dragging the length of your thread through these rough needles, and some of them are going to be, have like little catches on them or whatever. And to me, that's just a recipe for disaster. You're putting all this work into your basket, and then you're using this delicate thread that over time is just going to get, with the wax polyester thread, I will notice over time, I'm like, oh, it's a good thing I'm getting to the end of this piece of thread because some of this is kind of wearing thin. So you need a sturdy thread. I don't know what Glover's thread is. And I don't exactly know how heavy upholstery thread is, but it might work. The wax part of it is important, I think, because it helps the thread grip on itself. So if Glover's thread and upholstery thread are textured, then that might be a possibility. I just don't know what they are. Embroidery thread, I don't know. I just, there's a reason that I use wax polyester thread, and it's because it works. So I'm not sure. Somebody asked me, they said, well, couldn't you just use sewing thread and run it through like beeswax? Like if you had a little bar of wax or something, you just run it through. You have no idea just how much thread goes into making a basket. Like when you are wrapping that coil in the middle, it'll use like, I don't know, probably 2 maybe arm's lengths of thread. I don't know. It depends on how much of it you're wrapping. But that's an awful lot of thread. And so to think that it takes, to make a basket this size takes me about 10 hours. And to think that I'm going to add an extra step of waxing all of my thread by hand, yeah, no, I'm not doing it. So if you want to try it, go for it. But I mean, the good thing is, I mean, pine needles are free. So if you want to try it and have it not work, it's not like you're losing money or anything like that. So, but I'm teaching you with what I have learned to be something that is successful for making a basket. And that's why I recommend these things. So I don't know about these other things because I've never tried them, but you're welcome to give it a try. So, okay. Somebody asked me, when I was first asked this question, I thought, gosh, no way, that's not going to happen until I moved to Florida. Somebody asked me if the wet pine needles will mold. And so absolutely for sure, if you have damp pine needles in a bag that you're setting aside and you're keeping them damp and you leave them for more than just a couple of days, yeah, they're going to mold. But I think the person who asked me this question was asking, like if you're making your basket and you've got the coil going, there's pine needles that are wet all through that coil. And will that mold? If you live in the West, especially in the Southwest where it's dry, no, it's not going to mold because it's going to dry so quickly. But man, now that I live in Florida, yeah, it might mold on the insides, which is why, it's not the reason why, but it's a good case for treating your pine needles with vegetable glycerin, because that causes the pine needles to absorb glycerin. It makes them pliable. You don't have to keep them wet anymore. They don't have to be wet. They have absorbed glycerin and now they are pliable. And so you don't have to soak the needles. You don't have to keep them in a wet bag. When you're stitching, the needles themselves are dry. And so then you will avoid getting any kind of mold building up inside your basket. So, so yeah, I didn't understand that question completely until I moved to this part of the country. Okay, so people have asked me about using a thimble. In the video, I'm not wearing a thimble, but most of the time I wear a silicone thimble. I'll pop in a picture for you so you can see what this looks like. So I stab myself all the time when I make these baskets, but not on the ends of my fingers, not where I would wear a thimble. I stab myself in the thumb, and it just is when I'm pushing it through and I'm holding the basket over here and pushing it through. Sometimes I just end up stabbing my knuckle. That's where I end up getting myself. So a metal thimble would not be helpful. It's going to be bulky. It's going to be slippery. And I can't even imagine it. And it's just not going to be in the right place it's not going to be in the right place. But the silicone thimble I wear on the thumb of my working hand so that my fingers don't slip off of the needle, because you have to give it some push. And so anyway, you're pushing through and your fingers slip off. And inevitably what happens with me is as soon as my fingers slip off, I go back to grab it and I stab myself with the needle. It's like my brain says, grab that needle. But my fingers aren't accurate about doing that. So if I put a silicone thimble on, you can put it on your index finger and your thumb, but I've found that just wearing it on my thumb is enough. That gives me enough grip that it helps me to hold on to the needle, and then I can avoid stabbing myself. So, but just know you're going to end up stabbing yourself. I'm going to add in a question that I didn't write down. I have some more questions to address, but this made me think of this. A lot of people, I don't know why it is, but a lot of people look at what I do with making pine needle baskets and they immediately think, oh, a craft for children. This is not a craft for children, you guys. This is not. I don't know why people think that. One person said he wanted to do this with his 4-year-old niece. No, please don't. Unless your children love to be stabbed with sharp objects, don't do this with children. It first of all, I've been doing this for years, and I still poke myself all the time, and make myself bleed. Like I have to stop making my basket to get my thumb to stop bleeding. The other thing though is that there's a lot of muscle involved, a lot of coordination involved, a lot of like eye-hand coordination when you're wrapping and trying to get the whole thing wrapped around carefully. If you're looking at this and thinking, oh, my grandchildren would love this, or oh, my kids would love this, let me just say this. Make one for yourself first. Because if you go and gather all of the supplies and prep all the materials and then sit down and you find that your kids hate it or are crying or whatever, I mean, that's just going to be such a colossal disappointment. So make one yourself first. If you have like unusually amazing children who have this kind of patience and dexterity and all this kind of stuff, then go for it. But it's not a craft. It's not a little fun craft for children. It takes a long time, and it's not particularly easy. So okay, it's not that people can't learn to do it. It's just that it's not. I was a classroom teacher for 12 years. I taught kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, and sixth grade. I would never try this with a child under the age of 12. Yeah, I wouldn't. So, okay. All right. So somebody asked me about, they said if they make something that they're going to set something on that is like high temperature, will it melt the waxed thread? Like they were saying, like at Thanksgiving, if you were going to place a hot dish on this, would it melt the wax thread? Well, there's a couple of problems here. First of all, answer to that question, yes, it is going to melt the wax thread. But the bigger problem is not, the thread is not the problem. The problem is that pine needles are flammable and they will burn. So you can use your baskets that you make for all kinds of stuff, holding jewelry, displaying fruit, put a little cloth in it and put dinner rolls. I have a little one that I keep essential oil bottles in. I have a friend who puts guitar picks in his little basket. I mean, you can use them for all kinds of things, but the one thing I say don't use them for is as a trivet, like a hot pad, a hot trivet to put hot things on. You take something out of the oven, you set it on there so you don't burn your countertop. You're going to burn your pine needles and possibly start a fire. So I don't know, but I would imagine, I mean, this is flammable material. So, don't use it for anything hot. Yeah. Okay. Somebody asked me where I get my gauges. So in the video, I talk about getting a straw and just a length of like 1 to 1.5 inch straw. And the smaller the straw is, the tinier your coil is going to be. And the fatter your straw is, the fatter the coil is going to be. But I have copper ones. I got mine on Amazon, but I've not been able to find copper gauges recently. I've only been able to find brass. So I will link in the space below. I'll link the silicone thimbles that I get too, but I'll link in the space below the gauges that I have recently found on Amazon. You don't need them. I made baskets for 10 years just out of drinking straws, but I have 3. I use them all the time. They're great. And so if you want to have a nice gauge or a nice collection of gauges, then yeah, I mean, that's what I do, but you don't have to. So, but I will link it for you in the space below. Somebody said, someone asked, can I treat the dry green pine needles in glycerin? Yes, you can. I do. Just know that anytime you treat pine needles with glycerin, it deepens the color. So if you're treating tan pine needles, it makes them a little bit darker tan. If you treat a dry green pine needle, which is going to be kind of a faded gray green. It's going to make it a darker gray green. So, but yeah, absolutely. I do it all the time. Okay. And these last few questions are about glycerin. So somebody said, is glycerin expensive? And it really is not. I buy a jug for about, I'm trying to think. I think my last jug that I bought was maybe $30. And I make a lot of baskets in a year's time. And a gallon jug will last me a year, maybe more. And so you use 2 cups like if you have a casserole dish and you pile it up with pine needles, like well above the sides, because they're going to shrink down as you treat them. But if you pour 2 cups of glycerin on top of that, and then a bunch of water, and it treats a ton of pine needles, but it's going to last you a long time. So yeah, it's an extra expense, and you might want to get into making pine needle baskets first to see if you like it before you go ahead and buy a jug of that stuff. You can buy small bottles. The first time I did it, I bought a 16-ounce bottle to try it first, and I loved it. And so after that, I bought jugs. Somebody asked what the ratio of glycerin to water is, and I don't know. It's not an exact science. It really isn't. The idea is to get not a thick solution. It's mostly watery, but it has glycerin in it to get the pine needles to absorb that. The glycerin stays inside the pine needles. If you just poured glycerin all over the pine needles, the glycerin wouldn't get absorbed. So you need to make it watery. And then it gets absorbed and the glycerin stays, the water evaporates, and it keeps the pine needles pliable. So I don't have an exact ratio on that, but it's not an exact science. Somebody asked if glycerin is toxic. So what I use is food grade vegetable glycerin. I don't even know if there's a non-food grade vegetable glycerin. I don't know. I know that vegetable glycerin is used for a variety of things. It is used in desserts sometimes to keep them from forming crystals, which means you eat it and it's safe to eat. I think it's also used like to make a glossy finish on a dessert. Like have you ever seen those tarts that have berries on top and then they've got like this really, really thick, glossy something or other over the berries? I'm pretty sure that's probably a solution that uses glycerin, vegetable glycerin. But here's the question. Somebody was saying, can I, if I treat a batch of pine needles and then I take it out of the oven, can I cook dinner right after? Like, can I put a roast chicken in? You know, the oven is going to smell like pine. And so it's not going to be toxic, but your chicken may end up smelling like, it may end up tasting a little bit like pine. I think it might. I don't know. I guess if it were me, I would say I would probably wait a little while before I cooked my dinner in the oven just so that it didn't take on the scent of pine needles. But it's certainly not going to hurt anybody. Okay, and then what did somebody say? Can I re-soak glycerin needles? So if you treated some needles, and because glycerin treated needles will eventually get completely dry over like a long period of time. Can I re-soak them? Of course. You can just soak them in water, or you can retreat them. You can stick them back in the oven in a solution of glycerin and water. If I've treated a batch of glycerin, of pine needles with glycerin, and they happen to have dried out, and I go back and treat them again, I don't do the whole 3-hour thing. I just treat them for 1 hour because they've already got glycerin in them. I'm just kind of rejuvenating that, refreshing it. And then somebody also asked me, what if you have a basket that's already made and it was not treated with glycerin, but now you want it to be? Can you treat the entire finished basket? I've done it. It will actually tighten the basket. So if your stitches happen to be kind of loose, it'll tighten it because it's going to absorb glycerin. But what you do is you take your solution, you mix it up in like casserole dish or a aluminum pan or something like that, and just immerse the whole basket in there. And if it's not completely covered, just like bake it for an hour, flip it over, bake it for an hour, flip it over, bake it for an hour, in that glycerin solution. The one thing that's going to happen, the change, well, there's going to be two changes. The pine needles will likely change color, and then definitely the thread is going to change color. So if you used white thread, it is not going to be white anymore. It's probably going to turn kind of a creamy color or a tan color. I think mine was kind of orangey. I think I used some like light orangey thread, and it made it a deep rust color. And it sold, that basket sold at one of my shows. But yeah, you can definitely take an already completed, dry, plain basket and treat it with glycerin. Okay, and the last question is, how long can you keep used glycerin in the fridge? So if you made a batch of glycerin treated pine needles, you take the leftover solution and you I pour it into mason jars and just stick it in the fridge. How long can you keep it in there before it goes bad? I don't know. I've kept mine in the fridge for like 3 months and it was fine, but I don't know actually. So here's what I would say. If you leave it in there for a while, I would just say anytime you're going to reuse it, open the lid, look at the lid. If the lid has funky stuff on it or it's black or whatever, just throw it out. Glycerin's not that expensive. Just start over. If there's like some kind of weirdness on the surface, throw it out. But if it looks perfectly fine, the lid is fine, it looks perfectly fine, then go for it. So I will tell you that in my experience, 3 months in the fridge has been an okay amount of time to reuse some glycerin. So don't take that as, it could just be the ratio of water to glycerin that I happen to use or whatever. But just look at it, just eyeball it and see for yourself. If it looks at all strange, get rid of it. Those are all the questions that I have. So I will be doing some more videos. There was one question somebody had asked me about the placement of the needle when making a basket, and that I can't really do in a Q&A. I'm going to have to make another video to get a close-up view of that so I can show specifically where the needle goes. Thanks so much, you guys, for watching this video. If you have more questions, feel free to ask. I will put together another Q&A, and I don't just wait until I have a bazillion questions before I answer them. I always answer everybody's individual questions. So if you have a question, I will answer you now, but then I'll, probably do another one of these videos later on. So I hope this was helpful. Take care, you guys. And if you finish a basket, send it to me at myflagstaffhome@gmail.com. I'd love to see it. And if you have any questions, let me know. Take care, you guys, and I'll see you again on My Flagstaff Home. Bye-bye.